Thank you for visiting my channel. Before we start, hit the subscribe button below so you will be notified of future presentations. Today, we will briefly discuss the nature, application, and effects of the Iron Curtain Rule as provided under Article 992 of the New Civil Code. Article 992. An illegitimate child has no right to inherit ab intestato from the legitimate children and relatives of his father or mother, nor shall such children or relatives inherit in the same manner from the illegitimate child. The Iron Curtain Rule applies only to intestate succession. There is a barrier recognized by law between the legitimate relatives and the illegitimate child, so that one cannot inherit from the other and vice versa. The Iron Curtain Rule creates an absolute bar that operates bilaterally. It prohibits an illegitimate child to succeed intestate from the legitimate descendants, ascendants, and collateral relatives of his legitimate parent. This rule prevents legitimate and illegitimate relatives from inheriting from one another in the absence of a will. It has been said that the law, in doing so, merely recognizes the presumed animosity between legitimate and illegitimate relatives. The rationale behind this rule is clearly enunciated in the 1990 case of Diaz versus Intermediate Appellate Court, where the Supreme Court said, between the legitimate family and the illegitimate family, there is presumed to be an intervening antagonism and incompatibility. The legitimate family disgracefully looks down on the illegitimate child. The illegitimate child, in turn, hates the legitimate family. The latter considers the privileged condition of the former and the resources of which it is thereby deprived. The former, in turn, sees in the illegitimate child nothing but the product of sin, palpable evidence of a blemish broken in life. In street language, an illegitimate child is often called anak sa labas or bastard. These harsh terms are so old in their origin and so narrow in their conception of what an illegitimate child is. Our present laws, however, have broader concept of an illegitimate child. But when is a child legitimate and when is he illegitimate? Articles 164 and 165 of the Family Code give us the answer. Article 164 states that children conceived or born during the marriage of the parents are legitimate, and Article 165 states that children conceived and born outside a valid marriage are illegitimate. Under these definitions, an illegitimate status of a child depends on the existence of the parents' marriage from the child's conception until he is born. At this juncture, let us bring in the concept of representation, which seems to be inconsistent with the Iron Curtain Rule. How does the Iron Curtain Rule relate to the right of representation under Article 902 of the New Civil Code? Article 902 of the New Civil Code states, "The rights of illegitimate children set forth in the preceding articles are transmitted upon their death to their descendants, whether legitimate or illegitimate." Here is an illustration of the Iron Curtain Rule. Juan is the grandfather. Juanito is the legitimate son of Juan, who died ahead of Juan. And Juanito has two children, John, a legitimate son, and Jack, an illegitimate son. When Juanito died, only John can represent Juanito in the inheritance from grandfather Juan upon the latter's death. Jack cannot represent his father Juanito because he is illegitimate. That is pursuant to Article 992, the Iron Curtain Rule. Meanwhile, here is an illustration of the right of representation. Juan is the grandfather. Juanito is an illegitimate son of Juan who died ahead of Juan. And Juanito has two children, John, a legitimate son, and Jack, an illegitimate son. When Juanito died, both John and Jack can represent their father Juanito in the inheritance from their grandfather Juan upon the latter's death. This is pursuant to Article 902 that gives both the legitimate and illegitimate children the right of representation. Under the foregoing provisions of law, legitimate children can only be represented by legitimate descendants, but illegitimate children can be represented by both legitimate and illegitimate descendants. It appears, therefore, that insofar as the right of representation is concerned, legitimate children have inferior rights than their illegitimate relatives. The illustrations above are consistent with the facts and the decision obtaining in this case. Is there a remedy against the Iron Curtain rule? Philippine law on succession prohibits intestate succession between an illegitimate child and her parents' legitimate relatives. The law apparently presumes an ill will between legitimate and illegitimate relatives. However, it is possible that no hostility or animosity exists at all between an illegitimate child and her parents' legitimate relatives from whom he seeks to succeed. Fortunately, the Iron Curtain rule applies only to intestate succession. Hence, if legitimate relatives want to leave a device or legacy in favor of their illegitimate counterparts and vice versa, making a will is the way to go. Article 783 of the New Civil Code defines what a will is. It says, a will is an act whereby a person is permitted, with the formalities prescribed by law, to control to a certain degree the disposition of his estate to take effect after his death. This mechanism is allowed since the Iron Curtain rule only prohibits the illegitimate child from inheriting ab intestato or through intestacy. Intestacy occurs when a decedent did not execute a valid will during his lifetime. It also occurs when a court declares a will executed by a person as invalid. There are two types of will, the notarial and the holographic, and their requirements differ from each other. A relative, therefore, who wishes to execute a will must ensure that it complies with the requirements of law for his will to be valid. Through a valid will, the grandparent, Juan in our example, can still bequeath or give a portion of his estate to his illegitimate grandchild, Jack, despite the status of the child as illegitimate. Therefore, all is not lost for the illegitimate child. His legitimate relatives can execute a will in order for the illegitimate child to inherit from them. That is the remedy to the Iron Curtain rule. If you find this presentation helpful, please hit the subscribe button below to get notification of future lectures. Please comment below as to your thoughts, observations, and suggestions on the subject. Thank you.